Hello and welcome to The Content Bite, a podcast for freelancers who use their words to make money. I'm Rachel Smith, a freelance journalist, copywriter and content producer. I'm also the founder of Rachel's List, a jobs board and community for Australian writers and other creatives.
And I'm Lynne Testoni. I'm a journalist and content writer as well. Rachel and I are your weekly co-hosts, and every week we bring you all kinds of tips, tricks and some fabulous guests to help you make the most of your freelance business.
I used spreadsheets for 15 years, but when you freelance, the time comes when your business gets more complicated and I needed something more. And Rounded was the accounting software that finally converted me. It helped simplify tax time while still letting me take ownership of what goes on in my freelance business. It also gives me heaps of visibility over my finances. And although I use an accountant and a bookkeeper, that suits me because I like to see exactly what's happening with my cash flow.
Right. And don't forget, gold members of Rachel's List can save 20% on the first year of any annual Rounded plan.
Hi Lynne, how are you going? We've got such a great guest on today. She's living the dream and I can't wait to hear her story, having never been to New York myself, still on my bucket list.
Oh, wow. Yes, it's Melanie Hansch. So I first crossed paths with Melanie when she was managing editor of Donna Hay magazine, but she's since moved to New York and is working on some amazing titles over there. So I'm really keen to hear how she did it. So do you want to introduce Melanie?
Love to. Melanie Hansch is a seasoned food magazine editor who once ate at all the top 5 restaurants in the world in 1 week for fun, stood in line for 2 hours for Hong Kong's best dumplings for lunch, and judged the International Biscuit Festival in Knoxville, Tennessee, because biscuits. She's created food and lifestyle content for over 22 years across multiple platforms on 2 continents and is currently the deputy editor at Food and Wine magazine in the US. But Melanie has worked variously as a food writer, magazine and cookbook editor, and restaurant critic. And before joining Food and Wine, she was the editor-in-chief of the natural living brand Organic Life at Rodale, where she also oversaw the company's test kitchen, spent 7 years as the managing editor of Donna Hay magazine in Australia, one of my favourites, and also served as a chief sub-editor at Australian Gourmet Traveller. She and her husband own a wine bar in Eastern Pennsylvania called Cabinet and are opening a cafe and general store later this year. Amazing. Welcome, Melanie.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I confess you had me waited in line for 2 hours for dumplings. Please tell me that they were worth it and why.
They were worth it, though I have never stood in line for 2 hours for dumplings ever again. But this was back in 2010. And some people might remember this. There was a restaurant in Hong Kong called Tim Ho Wan, which won a Michelin star. And it was a really big deal because such an affordable, cheap, down-ho restaurant had never won a Michelin star. And it only had 20 seats. So you can imagine, the line to this place. The best thing about that experience, and I remember it distinctly, was that they had a woman in a suit at the door at a lectern, and it was her job to sort of, marshal the line, so to speak. And every few minutes, a black car with tinted windows would roll up. Someone would get out and whisper in her ear, and she would shake her head, because not even celebrities could jump the line at night. But was it worth it? Yes, as much for the drama and the yum cha boss at the front as it was the flavors and the techniques and the amazing steamed dumplings.
Oh, wow.
And I also need to ask, before we get into all the work stuff, about the world's top 5 restaurants in 1 week. How on earth did you manage it, and were they the best? Tell us the whole thing.
It was a bit of a folly. So the same year, it sounds like I just eat all the time, doesn't it?
There are worse things.
My husband managed to jag a reservation at El Bulli, which at the time was the top restaurant in the world, but it was also closing. It had announced that it was closing that second year. And we went in the lottery and we got a booking. And so we thought to ourselves, well, if we're going all the way to Spain to eat at this restaurant, where on earth should we eat as well? And so, we set our alarm for the middle of the night and rang restaurants all over Europe. And we managed to get a booking at El Cellar de Can Roca, which at the time I think was number 3, at the Fat Duck, at Noma in Copenhagen, at Pierre Garnier, probably a few others that I'm missing. But it was an incredibly indulgent gluttonous experience
Wow.
that, you know, which in my early 30s was pretty amazing and shiny and fabulous. I probably have some like ethical thoughts about that kind of indulgence at this point in my life and career. But at the time, it was truly wonderful. And even if it sounds a little bit cliched, I think some of the restaurants I enjoyed the most were the ones that were really playful, that were as cerebral as they were playful, because it meant that they were also delicious. And I actually, you know, Noma is on its way out. It's officially closing next year. And I actually really enjoyed the experience there because, you know, it was the first time that, you know, someone like Rene Redzepi brought chefs out of the kitchen, and chefs would come to the table with their dish, talk to you about the dish. You know, countless restaurants do that now, but back then no one was doing it. And I just really appreciated how he put staff front and center. I thought that was really cool.
How fantastic. That must have been quite an expensive week as well, I'm thinking.
Ergo why I, you know, have some issues with, you know, it was a lot of money. But I think, you know, at the time when, you know, you've been working in food magazines a few years, you're really starry-eyed about all of these chefs and restaurants. It was a really cool thing to do. And look, I don't regret it. Would I do it now? No, but I definitely don't regret it.
It's an amazing thing to have on your bio. Well, let's dive into your career journey. I mean, you've been an editor for years. So how did it all start? Talk us through that.
I joke that I'm kind of as legacy print as it gets, a bit of a dinosaur, because I had a very, very linear trajectory, like literally started as an editorial assistant, then a junior sub-editor, then a writer, then a chief sub-editor, then a deputy editor, then an editor-in-chief. You know, like I pretty much went through every role at a magazine. And I started at a small niche publisher called Universal Magazines, and they're actually still around. And they published like really niche titles like Dirt Action, which was a motocross magazine, and like a dog magazine and a luxury bathroom magazine. And they also happened to publish Cheap Eats, which back in the day was, you know, the oldest and most established restaurant guide in Sydney. And so I was mentored by the editors there, Kerry Boyne and John Newton. And that really sort of started my love, I think, of food journalism. Like they lit the fire, so to speak. And so I kind of, you know, actually jumped from there to EMAP. You remember EMAP back in the day?
Oh, yeah.
From there, I jumped to ACP Custom Media, you know, when Jerry Reynolds was working there back in the day. And then I jumped to Gourmet. Then I got poached by Donna. Her magazine was published under a license at News. I spent 7 years with her. And I think actually the key thing here is that there's a point, I think, as a journalist and as an editor where you kind of go off in two tracks. I think you either stay in a content lane, right, and you become a features editor or a wine editor or someone who specializes in reporting and assignments, or you kind of go the management track. And I went the management track. I did a lot of really great management training, both actually at ACP and at News Corp. I went through the leadership development program. I love managing people. I love managing teams. And I kind of went down that track. And I think that time and that training at Donna Hay sort of set me up for getting me to the States, because, you know, now I'm part of ostensibly the senior leadership team, the editorial team at Food and Wine. But I had a brief stint in a more strategy role with Rodale. So they were the biggest health and wellness publisher at the time in the US. And so I overlooked food strategy for all of their brands. And from there, I jumped to Food and Wine, which was a bit of a homecoming because I'd been in food magazines such a long time that it felt like coming home. So that was really nice.
Yeah. So when you moved to New York, how did that happen? Because I seem to remember you chatting to me and my boss at the time, Claire Bradley, who was a friend of yours, because that was quite a procedure, wasn't it, to move to the US? It was hard. How did it happen and how long did it take?
It was incredibly hard. And all in all, it took about 14 months.
Yeah.
So, you know, I felt like I'd hit a ceiling in Sydney, you know, as much as I loved my role and I loved my team and I loved my boss, Donna, who I'm lucky enough to, you know, call a mentor and a friend now. I was really hungry for more. And I think if you're adventurous and you're ambitious and you are hungry for more, you know, a lot of Australians leave Australia. I think that's just, you know, it's part of the push and the brain drain. And I mean, I'd always loved New York, but it also had an incredibly alluring and large publishing industry. So I started actually by just emailing every editor-in-chief of every food magazine that I liked. So that was Martha Stewart and Bon Appetit and Rachel Ray and Food Network and Epicurious. And I managed to get a meeting with everyone. So I surreptitiously flew over for a week, met with all these editors, had a really great response. And they were like, yeah, just come over here. This is great. You'll get a job. And it was kind of a bit chicken and egg, because as an Australian, you need a working visa. And to get a working visa, you need a job offer. So it's not as simple as it, just move over here, and when a job comes up, we'll give you a job. So I went home and I was like, oh, damn it. Felt a bit dejected. And then a year later, I went back and I met with every talent manager and HR manager at every publishing company in the States to talk more about that nitty-gritty of the visa process, and to really put myself on their radar as they were doing talent scouting and as roles were coming up. And I was applying for roles at the same time. And then eventually my CV landed across the desk of the CEO at Rodale, who was the biggest health and wellness publisher. And she liked me so much, she created a role for me, which is
wow,
very, very unheard of. But so that was the strategy role that oversaw food content for all of their brands. But, it was long and hard. And I think if anyone is thinking of doing it, you just have to be super tenacious. And, I could have, after that first round of talking to all the editors in chief, stopped and thought, ooh, this is too hard, but I kept going. So anyone who's thinking of doing it, keep going.
Donna Hay, particularly, the magazine has a nice profile in the US. That must have worked in your favor too, did it?
It absolutely did. And I think it's what got my foot in the door. All of those food magazine editors that I emailed, they were like, well, of course we know Donna Hay magazine and we love that magazine. And, it's funny, I spoke to a lot of industry people at the time, and I think Donna was very influenced by Martha Stewart, obviously, but that also worked in reverse. So you'd have photographers going on set at Martha Stewart shoots with Donna Hay tear sheets, to the side. And there was this sort of real reverse inspiration.
Martha used to get a lot of Australian photographers over for a month at a time. I remember that.
And she still does, actually. So while the magazine doesn't exist anymore, it's one of the magazines that was shuttered last year. They still do a lot of digital content, and there's really wonderful photographers I worked with at Donna Hay, like Con Poulos, Chris Court and William Mepham, who still occasionally will shoot in the States. And it's really lovely to see that crossover, actually.
Yeah, I do remember it was a big thing for Australian food photographers. The US does food differently, doesn't it? Or did?
It did. And I think the same thing that Donna revolutionized in Australia when she was at Marie Claire, which was to say, to shoot food in daylight in a studio with very minimal propping and let the food speak for itself. That really, really, really resonated with Americans. And it meant that it's great because our food stylists, our food photographers, and our food magazines actually have a huge reputation in the US. And always did and still do. It's really great.
Amazing. Well, I'd love to just talk a little bit about New York, because as I mentioned above, I've never been. Where do you live? I mean, what do you love about living there? And do you have any sort of rituals that, are unmissable things food-wise?
So my confession is that I stayed in New York for 2 years and then I left. I know. I lived in Brooklyn for the first 2 years when I was working for Rodale. And, the wonderful thing about New York is it has a really infectious energy and a vibrancy and an air of possibility that just never switches off.
Yeah.
And you get the sense that you can do anything at any time to suit any whim anywhere, and that's, I think, the allure and the appeal of New York for a lot of people. It also really pushes you. It really does. It's a welcoming place, but it challenges you and it stretches you. And I like that. I like a bit of discomfort. I like being pushed in different directions, but also, talking about rituals, the things that I really enjoyed when I lived there. And now, so I go in once a week for work, and I still do this now, is even though the subway system is great, I love walking in New York, particularly in the beautiful neighborhoods, whether it's the West Village or Greenwich Village or the Upper West Side or Brooklyn Heights. One of the things I used to do all the time is get off the subway early, 2, 3, 4 stops early, particularly in the summer and particularly in Brooklyn, just so I could walk past all those beautiful brownstones on my way home. And it's just a really lovely thing to do. In terms of food, it's, the thing that really strikes you about New York is that it has such a wonderful Jewish deli culture that we don't, at least back 8 years ago, we didn't have that in Sydney. And so that's like a very easy ritual, like the morning bagel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Is a very easy ritual to pick up. But having said that too, there are so many great Australian cafes in New York. There's a huge diaspora. I call them the koala mafia. There are a lot of us. But going to an Aussie cafe for a coffee is a really important touchstone for a lot of Australians that live in New York.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, it sounds like when you got to Rodale, that was the first job that you got when you got there. Sounds like you didn't have to work hard after that to establish yourself, or did you find that you still had to do a lot of legwork?
Hell yes.
Yeah. That was a silly question, wasn't it?
So when you move countries, it's like being 21 again on two levels. One is the living aspect. So when you move to the US, your credit history counts for naught. So you're turning up, you have to convince a bank to give you a credit card. You have to convince a landlord or a real estate company to give you a lease. And those things are really hard. And then you combine that with the fact that all of the people at your new company don't give a hoot who you are in Australia or what you did in your career or which brands you worked for. You've really, really got to prove yourself all over again. And
that's exhausting.
It's hard, you're in your mid-30s and you're like, wow, it's like I've started my career all over again. So I just put my head down and I just worked and tried to get results so that I could garner, the respect of my colleagues and my peers. But it's not for the faint-hearted. I think you need a lot of gumption to kind of walk through that fire, because there were points where it just wasn't very nice. There can be a lot of mean girl energy.
Yeah.
In New York, and it's like you get to New York and people are like, welcome to New York now, you sink or swim. Right.
Yeah.
So it can be very ruthless. And I think it can take a special type of person to be thick-skinned and to kind of wade your way through that.
Yeah. What sort of differences are there with the US magazine experience compared to Australia? Because the teams are structured a bit differently, aren't they?
Well, for starters, the size of the mastheads are huge. And so when I got there, I was like, what on earth do all these people do? And what are all these titles? And how does an editor differentiate from an associate editor to an assistant editor to a deputy editor? I think Americans love a title. So there's a lot of senior vice presidents of this and that, even on the editorial content side. And so I think navigating just the sheer size of those mastheads was really kind of weird and confronting at the beginning. Mind you, that has changed now because, we've everyone's downsized. No one has the budget and the resources that they used to. So teams are definitely a lot smaller. But I just remember getting there and just, huge amounts of money being thrown around, like advertising budgets are huge. To buy an ad page in a big national magazine is huge. I remember landing at Food and Wine and, looking at the budget for a cover shoot was the same budget as a whole issue of Donna Hay magazine. And you're just sort of like, wow. This is like the big league now. And I think that was, really eye-opening in the beginning. And also just, I think that Americans really love a corporate structure and a hierarchy. And I think in Australia, we're a little bit more, we roll our sleeves up.
Yeah.
We're a bit more multitasked. And I think we're not afraid to kind of work across different functions of a magazine. And I think one of the difficulties I had at the beginning was, I was a managing editor at Donna Hay magazine, and that meant I managed people, I managed the budget, and I produced content, and I helped produce lineups. And I kind of dabbled in both the production side and the content side. But in America, it's like, no. A managing editor only looks after production and budgets, and an executive editor looks after lineups. And when I first got here, or at least when I was interviewing, people would say, well, what are you? Are you a managing editor or are you an executive editor? And it just used to blow their minds when I'd say, well, I'm actually both. And they're like, well, no, you have to choose one. That's difficult. I think, those sort of differences and they like to kind of box people into a very specific role. And I think because we're scrappier in Australia,
Yeah.
We're kind of not, when I think we're less hung up about that for sure.
Yeah, I definitely found that hierarchy when I worked in London as well, because the mastheads were quite big. I was at IPC when I worked there, and everybody was boxed in and had their role. And I was a sub, but I was really trying to do some writing on the side. And I remember that being such a process for them to accept that a sub would do features as well. And, it's funny, isn't it?
I think they've loosened up a bit about it now, especially with, how many changes, and we have to do more with less resources and less heads. And I think that's definitely loosened up. But when I first got there, it was very, very rigid.
Yeah. What are you seeing? I'd love to know what you're seeing with word rates, because obviously we're seeing them, dive sharply in Australia. And I still look at a lot of pitching call outs in America, and the word rates seem so amazingly high. Are you seeing them go down a bit now, or is it still pretty good?
No, we're seeing it. I think it's going down a little bit. When I first got here, we would feature rates for feature writing were, $2 to $2.50 a word.
Amazing.
I can say that it's more at the New York Times, but that's big leagues. But, on average, so I edit a few sections at Food and Wine, one of them being the travel issue, and we generally pay $1.50 a word. Sometimes we push it to $2, but then, for a front of book section that's like an easier lift and a little bit more lighthearted, it might go as low as $1 a word.
Yeah.
And less for digital, and so there's a fluctuation. But I think, one of the conversations that we're having a lot is like, is this whole idea of word rates actually redundant? It starts to feel a little bit antiquated. And so we've actually started dabbling more in a package fee, that really takes into account sort of the reporting, the intellectual rigor, all the effort and the thought that has to go into a piece as much as the writing, and try and come up with a rate that reflects that rather than the sort of very rigid word rate. And I don't know whether that's also something you're starting to see in Australia, but I think it's better. I think it's better than the old, well, this is how we're going to value your time and your expertise.
Well, Lynne, you see that on interiors magazines a bit, don't you? That package fee.
Yeah, I get package fees for things like a house story, and that's got multiple layers of captions and fact checking and details, as well as the actual story. Sometimes it's even organising the shoot. I do think one of the things I wanted to mention, that while you do pay well, the pressure on writers there is quite huge. The rigor with which your facts are checked and everything. I remember a few friends who've written for US magazines, they go, wow, look at the word rate. And then they go, oh my God, I've never worked this hard in my life. Do you think that's true?
I think it is true. And it's one of the differences that I noticed is, the resources that is put into copy and fact checking and research teams is enormous. There are so many more checks and balances and filters. But, again, I think that's probably more of a symptom of Australia being a little scrappier and not having the same sort of resources. And I think that's gotten even more intense in the last few years as we've had, culture wars, political strife in the US, race, all of these issues, diversity, equity, inclusion, so many things that have come up, that the rigor that a writer has to go through now is actually, it's a lot more strenuous. It is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And, it's not easy.
Well, we hear a lot about the decline of print media here. We've had a few magazines close, and as Rach mentioned, some of the word rates and things have dropped a little bit. Are you finding a similar vibe there? Or, I mean, Food and Wine is pretty old, isn't it? It's very established.
Yeah, Food and Wine is 45 years old.
Wow.
It was, I'm going to have to just give you this fun fact. It was born in 1978 as an insert in Playboy magazine. Actually,
oh, wow.
because Hugh Hefner, in his infinite wisdom, recognized that the Epicurean space, was going to be like this really trendy new space. So he launched it as an insert in Playboy, and then it became a standalone magazine. But I will say that the magazine industry here has been just as challenged as it has in Australia, and not just because of the pandemic. There are a lot of changes happening before the pandemic. So the company that I moved to the States with, Rodale, was bought by Hearst, and I'd say we lost a huge chunk of our workforce. It was the first time in my career I'd been made redundant, actually. So, that was a baptism of fire. But then, I joined Food and Wine, and we're now on our third masters. So when I joined, it was with Time Inc. Then we were bought by a very large publishing company called Meredith, who were the largest publishers in the US. And a year ago, we were bought by a digital media company called Dotdash. So now our company is called Dotdash Meredith. But in the meantime, there have been huge changes at Condé, at Hearst, at Dotdash. Lots of magazines have closed, including, some really big names and some really surprising things where you would be like, whoa. When I say big names, I mean like Allure or InStyle. Martha Stewart no longer has a magazine. Marie Claire magazine closed over here in the States. O magazine, Oprah's magazine. So, a lot of big fish have gone, and our budgets are smaller, and we're tasked with, higher priorities, huge goals that we have to, particularly, traffic goals for digital. They're aggressive, and we have less people to do it. So, I would say that the magazine industry here has been just as challenged as the magazine industry in Australia. But I will also say it's picking up. Post-pandemic, we're seeing, particularly, at Food and Wine, our numbers are really buoyant. But I think that comes from the fact that one of our largest advertising categories is travel. And as we know, travel is really picking up. As everyone is getting out in the world again, and all our travel advertisers start advertising again. So amazing.
Well, you've worked on both sides. What do you think Australia's print market can learn from the US, and what do we do better?
One of the things that really struck me when I moved over there was the revenue models and how different they were. And that might have changed now after 8 years, but I was a little shocked that so much of magazine revenue in the States came from advertising, and very, very little came from circulation. And that they would discount their subscriptions so much. Like you could get, and you still can, you can get a magazine subscription for $12 a year. Like that's nothing. That is not valuing your content. I have a lot of issues with this. Right? But what it is getting you is more people, ergo more eyeballs, and eyeballs is what you're selling to your advertisers. So that is very much the US model. Whereas I think when I left Australia, and at least at Donna Hay, it was the case that, about 50% came from circ and about 50% came from advertising, which I think is a much healthier mix. So, and also I don't feel like Australia discounts its subscriptions out the wazoo. It's like what, 60, 70, and I think actually, I think that's a better model. So I think there's something to be learnt from that. And certainly I've seen certain publishers in America actually now putting the cover price up on things, kind of going in that direction. In terms of what I think the American system does really well is, like I kind of touched on it before, but the resources that go into research departments and how data driven they are. And, we do reader surveys almost every month. The previous company I worked for did cover testing. Like, I'd never experienced that in Australia, but all of it was, they just really focused on data driven results. The other huge place that I've seen so much growth is in e-com and in affiliate revenue. It's like accolade programs, licensing, magazine brands that have their own products or that put their names to products. Like it's millions and millions and millions of dollars, like really incredible. And I think, that brands here have really excelled at that. I mean, I'm not quite so sure what that experience is like in the US, but that's certainly an area where I've seen like a lot of growth.
Wow.
Interesting.
I mean, we see in Australia often that the editorial team and the digital team are so separate when, they could work together so much more effectively. What's that like in the US? Are they more integrated?
It's funny you asked that, because it's gone one way and the other and swung widely actually in the last 8 years. So, well, at Rodale, it was a lot more integrated. But when I arrived at Time Inc., it was like, no, you keep them completely separate. I know at Hearst, they keep them completely separate. But now that we've been bought by a digital media company, I think we're actually working a lot more at integration. We've actually given a lot of our print editors digital duties to make that integration a lot more seamless. But it still bounces around. And it's surprising, I actually find it surprising that the editor-in-chief of a magazine is not the editor-in-chief of a website, that they actually have separate leadership, separate budgets. So that's still very much separate, but, you know, we as a team try and work very closely together and are very integrated, but it's maybe not reflected in sort of the leadership structure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So aside from the editorial work you do, it must be very cool to own a wine bar. Tell us a little bit about that and how you juggle that.
I don't know if I juggle it very well. And also, you know, I'm not going to glamorize restaurant ownership. It's really hard work.
It's a hard slog.
It is. And, you know, we've poured our life savings into it, but it's wonderful, I think, to have created something that reflects our values and our passion.
Yeah.
My husband's been in the wine industry for a long time. So, you know, the wine bar is sort of like a culmination of many years of passion and ambition. I kind of bring my strengths to it. So I do all of the socials,
Yeah.
you know, all of the comms. And actually my favorite thing to do is I work with the kitchen really closely on menu development. And it's kind of, I think that comes from my time working in test kitchens, right? When we're testing recipes and we're tweaking a dish. I work with the kitchen very much the same way. And I don't think they've ever worked with someone like me before, which might scare them, but they've actually come to really appreciate it because it just adds another layer of nuance and creativity and collaboration and trying to push things, which is really nice. But I do love that aspect of it.
How amazing. And you're also opening a cafe and a general store together. That really excites me because you could choose all your products and, is that the best bit?
Yeah. So we actually, the last 5 years, owned a cafe. It was called Tucker. And our wine bar landlord gave us the opportunity to move our business into a bigger space next to our wine bar space downtown with a liquor license. All of these things. So we put Tucker into hibernation 12 months ago, and the plan is to reopen it next to Cabinet hopefully in about 6 months. But, you know, these things never run to the timeline that you want them to. But, you know, the retail element, the general store element came out of the pandemic because when we realized that we were going to be shut down as a restaurant, we were like, oh, what are we going to do? So we basically went from being a restaurant to being a general store overnight. And as we transitioned out of the pandemic, we decided to keep the retail element because, you know, I think we realized it was really important to have multiple revenue streams. But to your point, Rachel, it's fun having stuff, you know, and using the same ingredients in the restaurant as you're selling.
Yeah.
And I just love that whole concept of, you know, a multi-purpose community space, like drop in and buy a roll of toilet paper, but have a glass of wine.
How nice.
Amazing.
So do you have sort of like a daily or weekly routine? You're juggling so many different things. What does your usual week look like?
I'm very lucky that since the pandemic, I don't need to commute to New York all that often. So I tend to just go in once a week, usually on a Tuesday or Wednesday. And then I work from my home office the rest of the time. What that has afforded me, I think, is a much better work-life balance. But I'm also, I think, more productive, more effective, more successful for Food and Wine working from home than I am in the office. So I'm a huge proponent in remote work. And I know that's been sort of at the nexus of some pretty hardcore debates. But, you know, what it has allowed me is to have that involvement in my side hustle, you know, to be able to, you know, not get home from Manhattan at 9 o'clock at night and cook a healthy meal, to be able to get up and walk the dog and do yoga. And, you know, I have a much better work-life balance, mental health, physical health, working from home. And then I spend a little bit of time at the restaurant on weekends, but yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It is. Gosh.
Something I didn't ask you when we were talking about the mags is I know that our audience would love, a lot of them would love to pitch American mags and get more work that way and perhaps take advantage of the higher word rates and that sort of thing. What would be your advice to Aussie writers, you know, keen to pick up some American clients and, you know, connect with American editors?
I think it's really important to read the publications that you want to pitch to, and become really intimate with their formats, you know, what kind of storytelling they are looking for, and definitely to sort of network and get on the radar of some of those editors. I'm always happy to help make connections where I can. If possible. I tend to go to a few conferences a year where I do speed dating with writers and they pitch me, and then give them different leads and whatever else. But I think also now the really cool thing is that with us coming out of the pandemic, so many magazines are looking for storytelling from different parts of the world, especially in the travel space. I think a lot of editors are very open to receiving pitches from over the world to get out of that sort of very insular world that we've been in the last 3 years. So it's a really good time, but it is very competitive.
You have to be totally on top of your game, don't you?
You really do. And you have to have mastered the art of the really, really snappy pitch in maybe 2 paragraphs at the most, which, is not easy. And that's sort of like, why me? Why now? Here's the story that I'm going to tell. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, we ask all our guests for their tech tips. So we'd love to know the digital tools that you would be lost without.
I am such a Luddite.
A lot of our guests say this.
No, my husband always jokes. He's like, God, you don't even have an iPad, and it's true. I mean, obviously I rely on my iPhone, but I am a good old fashioned note taker. I have notebooks out the wazoo, and I've only recently started using the notes function on my iPhone. I will say that it has saved me. I have left notebooks in hotels and lost entire reporting and assignment notes, so I, have learnt to rely a little on the cloud and on my iPhone. I will say that the huge tech difference in my life is more from a work perspective. And I don't know if this is the same in Australia, but we basically do all our work on Slack.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
We share layouts in Slack. We have, planning meetings in Slack. We have a channel for every department. It's pretty wild. 4 years ago, we would never have thought about working this way. And I think Slack has completely revolutionized the way that we work in publishing.
I always say that about Rachel's List, because when we moved to Slack, we spoke to an automation expert and she got us into Slack. Our entire business completely changed and became so much more efficient overnight. And Lynn and I use Slack to plan the podcast and to share scripts. And, we use it, we're on it all day. It's just such a brilliant tool.
Quite simple too.
Yeah.
It also eliminates the need for a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
Right?
And emails.
Yes, better meeting hygiene, better email hygiene.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Totally with you there.
So I wanted to finish on a bit of a nice high about the future of magazines. You said earlier that you feel that there's an uptick now. So is that what you're seeing?
I think there is an uptick, and I also think, my gut has always said that I think the magazines and the print products that will survive are the ones that are of incredibly high production quality. So great paper stock, excellent photography, excellent writing. And I want to give an example of this because I think it's kind of a good harbinger of the future. There's a magazine called Coastal Living that Meredith owned, and they actually closed it. So it became digital only. And then what they decided to do was they thought, well, let's bring it back quarterly and let's put it on this amazing paper stock with amazing photos and make it thick and coffee table like, and we'll charge $20 for it. And let's see what happens. It has been so successful. They've had to do multiple print runs of it. Wow. I think they've increased the frequency. And I think it's a proof of concept. I think what it's shown is that consumers and readers will buy a beautiful product like that they find engaging and delightful and surprising and a good read. And my gut says that it is that kind of product, I think, that has a future.
That's interesting. That's a differentiator from digital too, isn't it?
Yeah.
The stock and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, Melanie, this has been so brilliant. Thank you so much for talking to us and sharing your career journey with us. Where can people find out more about you or connect with you?
Probably Instagram, Mel Hansch, Cabinet Wine Bar. I occasionally am on LinkedIn, but I don't lurk there a lot. I will say Americans love LinkedIn. They love it. But they also use Facebook as a networking tool, which as an Australian, I find very perplexing. But Instagram is probably the best place to find me.
Great.
Fantastic. Thanks, Melanie, for being our guest. It's been lovely. And it's making me think about so many things about food and wine and living in the States and making such a big change. So that's the end of our show. But thanks to everyone who's listening and sharing us on social media. And so head to the show notes for all the details about connecting with Mel. And don't forget to leave a rating and review.
And thank you again to our sponsors, Rounded, easy accounting and invoicing software made just for Australian freelancers and sole traders. You can find them at rounded.com.au. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.